So if the intent of eyeballs is to detect visible light, and you are a species of fish that was born in complete darkness, and your ancestor was born in complete darkness, and the one before that was complete darkness, is that mutation that, oops, you don't have any eyeballs, good, bad, or eh? If eyeballs detect light, and there is no light in your home to detect, is that helpful, harmful, or kind of a whatever mutation? It's kind of a whatever, right? It's not really, it doesn't really help them, doesn't really hurt them, but it doesn't really, it is kind of a whatever. They're also very, very white in color, which means they aren't very good at being camouflaged with their surroundings. But again, if you're living in complete darkness and your predators have to detect differences in colors, which is dependent upon light, good, bad, or eh for a mutation. It's kind of another, like, eh, whatever for a mutation. However, if you were to take those two fish and you were to throw them into Lake Wassa, how long do you think those fish would last? Not very long, right? They'd probably get eaten fairly quickly. So if that mutation would have first occurred in Lake Wassa, would that mutation been good, bad, or eh? Probably bad, right? So same mutation, two different environments have different impacts. So if those fish were thrown in Lake Wassa and they die really quickly, how likely were they around long enough to have baby fish? Not very long, right? So what's the probability that those baby fish are going to be born in Lake Wassa and have more baby fish with that mutation? Very unlikely, because they probably weren't around long enough to reproduce. However, if those fish are in complete darkness, and it's kind of an eh, whatever mutation, they're more likely to have babies and pass those traits on to the next generation. Okay? So mutations can be both good, bad, and whatever. Sometimes they can kill you, sometimes they're harmful. Cancer would be an example of something that would be harmful or potentially deadly. So there's different types of mutations. Sometimes we refer to mutations being spontaneous, and they happen because we don't know why. They just happen. There are some that are not spontaneous. There are some that we have some suspicion, correlation, scientific evidence that may suggest that these mutations were caused by certain things. Okay? And a lot of times these examples are referring to things called carcinogens. And carcinogens are known cancer-causing agents. So we have evidence to suggest that if you smoke cigarettes for X amount of years, your odds of getting lung cancer increases. If you are exposed to an excessive amount of radiation, your likelihood of developing some form of cancer increases. Marie Curie, the person who did the X-ray crystal, took that picture of DNA, she died of cancer because of her research. There's a book written about it. I think it's called The Clockwork Girls, something like that. There were women that, pocket watches, right? You wind a pocket watch and they have dials that turn. Well, that's great during the daylight, but at nighttime, how do you see the hands on your clock? Well, now we push a button and a battery makes the thing illuminate, but back in the 1800s or whenever, before we had those battery operated watches, we wound them with springs, and they painted fluorescent paint, or not fluorescent, they paint that would glow in the dark. Now we have some glow in the dark paints that you put in the sunlight, and because they get some energy from the sun, they absorb it, and then when you put it in darkness, they glow. But there's also certain types of paint, additives that you can put in paint, that glow regardless of whether they were in the sun or not, and they have some radioactive elements in them, radium I think it was. So what watchmakers did is they would go through and they would have people, they happened to be women, that would paint the hands of the pocket watches with this radioactive paint. And then your watch hands would glow. Whenever you pull out of your pocket, you could see it because they were glowing. Which the paint in and of itself, to like the people painting it, wasn't harmful from like hey, I have this pocket watch, it was a wrong type of radiation that would cause the user to get cancer. But there was a high correlation of the women who were painting the watches that they got cancer and died. So after some looking into like historical records, again, it wasn't the actual paint like touching their skin. It was the fact that they used paintbrushes, and in paintbrushes, when you use them and you're doing really fine detail, like small, because they're like watch hands, painting the hands of those watches, the bristles would get frayed. So they would try to draw the bristles back together, and the way that they would do that is they'd take the paintbrush and they put it in their mouth and they'd like pull it on their tongue and on their lips to bring the bristles back to a point. That was just what they did, not knowing. But now they ingested that radioactive material, which then led to high cancer rates and deaths. Okay, so we have certain things that we know cause cancer. Ultraviolet light can lead to skin cancer. Those are some things that we know that can cause mutations. So when we talk about mutations, yesterday's activity, that's what these were. They were either a point mutation or a frame shifting mutation, and I just asked you to describe what happened instead of calling it by name. But a point mutation occurs at a point, and it's typically a substitution. So instead of being like CCG, it's CCT. A letter at a point was changed, was substituted. And what it does is it changes a point, and it changes a word in our sentence from yesterday. So big fat cat ate the big red rat. If we just change that C to an A, the big fat ad ate the red rat. Has some changing in the word. So our original sentence yesterday said biology is so fun. We had a point mutation number 3. There was a point mutation that a letter was changed. There was a mutation. However, it still read biology is so fun. There was a mutation, but it had no impact. It didn't change our sentence at all. That same thing can happen with DNA. DNA codes for mRNA. mRNA brings in tRNA. tRNA brings in amino acids. Amino acids make proteins. The way those proteins are made is based upon the amino acids that came in. The proteins that we have make different traits. So there are times we can have an amino acid stay the exact same, even though there was a substitution, just like biology is so fun, biology is so fun. There was another point mutation on your thing that says biology is so cookies. There was a single letter that changed a single word. Did it change the overall meaning? A little bit. Okay? So instead of saying biology is so fun, it's biology is so cookies, which on tactic is like the new upcoming trend word. So you'll find it'll be on TikTok soon, but it's on tactic first. You guys just don't know about tactic. Okay? So once it hits TikTok, then you're going to start using cookies instead of fun, exciting, cool. You just wait. Okay? So it didn't really change the sentence all that much, but it did change it a little bit. It changed a word at a point, called a point mutation. Different types of point mutations. The first one that we talked about where it still says biology is so fun, it was a silent mutation. It did change the sequence, but it coded for the exact same amino acid or the exact same word. It didn't do anything. It didn't change anything. We could have something, they call it a missense. I'm not too concerned that you know about silent, missense, and nonsense. I do want you to know point mutation and frame shift mutation. So a missense is like it changes one thing. So biology is so cookies would be a missense. It changed it a little bit, but it didn't make it crazy bad. But it could cause something called a nonsense point mutation, because if instead of saying biology is so fun, biology is so cookies, it could say biology is, and it triggered a stop. Okay, which would change the amino acid sequence. It'd stop it prematurely, which then would change your protein, which would change the trait or the sentence that's being used. Frame shift mutations tend to be much more significant. They're much more severe because we generally, it's where we add or we delete a single base pair. But by adding or deleting a single base pair, you're not just changing a amino acid or a word, you're changing each and every word or amino acid from that point on. We shift it because we still have to look at 3 letters at a time. So instead of being ACT, TCA, GCC, it's ACT, TTC, AGC, and everything from that point on gets messed up. So that's what some of your mutations yesterday were. For example, mutation number 1 didn't read biology is so fun. It says biology is to best anew with no stop, and it went dot, dot, dot essentially, like, and it should keep going if we had more basic. That completely changed that sentence from that mutation on. Biology is, instead of so fun, to best anew. Or the last one, mutation number 4, was a deletion, and it says biology every make day Beatles without a stop. And it would keep coding and keep coding and keep coding nonsense that would have a pretty significant impact. So we call this a frame shift because our 3-letter sequence is off for everything and everything beyond that point. So we can say, okay, mutations kind of sound bad, but what causes them? We talked about some causes, some just happen, some are spontaneous. We as humankind have intentionally mutated some things. So we can go through and we can modify organisms a couple different ways. There's something called GMOs, or there's a newish technique called CRISPR. And it's a process in which we can go through as humans and modify the genetic sequence of organisms because we want to. You say, well, why would we want to? Because I hate eating grapes with seeds in them. I don't know about you, but I hate biting into that grape and crunching on a seed. It's just, if only we did get rid of those seeds. Or what about a watermelon? Those black watermelon seeds, you gotta spit out all over the place. Couldn't we just make those seeds not mature? Oh, seedless. Okay, or what if we had a type of crop that we wanted to be immune to something? So what if a farmer is going to plant a field of corn? Their corn is going to grow. But what else is going to grow in their field? Weeds. Now they're both fighting for resources, water, nutrients, sunlight. So if you have a garden, what do you need to do to your garden? To make sure your carrots are growing or your tomatoes are growing. You don't want the weeds to overtake your garden, so you have to weed your garden, right? You got to remove the weeds. Well, that takes a lot of effort, manual labor, so there's chemicals that we can use to get rid of weeds. Well, how do we not get them on the ones we want? Great question. We got to be very careful. Well, gosh, wouldn't it be really slick if we planted some corn or soybeans in a field? We'd let them start to grow and let the weeds grow right next to it. Then all we have to do, and you guys know what Roundup is? What does Roundup kill? Weeds, but pretty much any plant. Almost all plants it'll kill. So wouldn't it be kind of cool if we could plant corn or soybeans, let them start to grow, let the weeds start to grow, and then just go down the field and just spray Roundup on everything, and it will kill everything except for your corn and soybeans. They did it. They did it. It's called Roundup Ready Corn, Roundup Ready Soybeans. Now some people say, well, what impact does Roundup have? That's another issue, but that's what we can do. They call them genetically modified. There's also a newer technique of modifying genes called CRISPR. And CRISPR is a technology that's 5 to 10-ish years old that we're getting better and better at as we go on, that they're going through as scientists and humankind. We can find a particular section of DNA that we want or don't want. We can cut it, we can remove it, and we can put in the sequence we want. And there has some good implications, and there's some maybe questionable things that we could do with it. So I got like just about the perfect amount of time. I'm going to show you this video because they're going to do a better job with CRISPR than I will.
Imagine you were alive back in the 1980s and were told